And this week we are going to be working on one of our player characters, Gonthor, who is a Warlock. And I thought this mini, though it's generally used as a monk or described as a monk, I figured it would make a great Warlock. I do notice, because there are a couple of areas that the primer did not get on this miniature, so I'm going to have to touch up a little bit of the primer, and then we'll be able to get right into the painting. But this will be Gonthor, the Warlock, who is also a changeling for his race, currently disguised as a half-elf. And Gonthor started the campaign. The player, unfortunately, has had to step away for a little bit due to some work commitments, and I have some backstory bits that blend right into the story itself for Gonthor, so that he will be able to rejoin the campaign at the same level as the player characters who are currently adventuring in the realm. And just touching up some of the primer here. Just a little bit from possible pull away or maybe even rubs, as it was juggling back and forth for some of the different photo shoots that I've done, and moving it on and off the to-do table. It's nice to be able to get this one done. You can see, based on the rim of the base, the player's favorite color is purple. So I'm going to integrate purple as often as I can into this paint job. I think it'll play up pretty nice. And as we get the skin tones, I'm going to change from what I normally do on a half-elf, which is kind of a regular warrior flesh tone. I actually used a little bit of a earthen brown in this to give it a little bit darker tone, and that way it has kind of that story. Because the character is not an actual half-elf, you'll definitely be able to tell a difference on the table, even though the players themselves or the player characters themselves may not be able to tell. And I think it'll just look really good as part of the adventuring table. So just going in with the darkest skin tone. This one I'm going to work a little bit different. I'm not going to use the mid-tone and then shade it. I'm actually going to start with the darkest skin tone and then highlight up, because I want a little bit more dark tone to the flesh tones on this mini. And aside from the face and hands, also we're going to expose the legs. Because Gonthor is a Warlock and not wearing armor currently, we'll just kind of show that they are not an armored character and have bits of flesh sticking out. And you can see I didn't use the handle yet on this miniature when I started painting it today. And I've just kind of moved my painting area, so I did not have my handle accessible when I started painting Gonthor, so kind of a pain. Now, because I am using really thin tones, I'm able to paint over the previous pretty quick. We want good opacity and really good coverage on this dark tone. You can see I'm just putting the paint on. Because this is the first color, a lot of this is going to get covered up or corrected when we go over the areas that we intend to paint. And just good opacity to this flesh tone. Get that skin showing really well. And Gonthor played a few sessions when we first started, and interesting character. So the Warlock aspect is played out kind of like Vince in Pulp Fiction, but instead of a briefcase, he actually has like a satchel that he carries around. I'm going to integrate it into the backpack on this miniature. I think it'll come out cool. So here we start picking out the details as we start to highlight on the face, the cheeks, cheekbones, nose, forehead, and just a little bit under the nose and the chin. And then the hands, you'll see we do a lot of coverage on this next tone. We leave the darkest bits close to the sleeve and in the recesses between the fingers. We want to have that contrast, but until we get to some lighter tones, there's still about 80% coverage from this layer to the previous. And on the legs, really in the upper shin and the upper calves. And then again, it'll remain darkest closer to the boots. And this can sometimes be challenging because you know light is not directly hitting the tops of those calves because of the fabric above it. But because it's a fantasy miniature, we can paint it lighter at the top without any worries of breaking reality, because it's for a game. And of course, these minis my players receive as a gift for taking the time to participate in a campaign. They'll get to keep this long after the game is done. They can use this at the table to represent their character, or they can bring their own. And to let all that dry, you see the challenges I have picking that up. That's okay. Now we're going to go through and put in the black for the eyes. This is a challenge with this miniature because of that staff. So get the black in there. I do this before I do any further highlighting, so that if I mess up I can go over it with the skin tones that I've worked with, as well as highlighting it out. But it came out really good for the black of the eyes. And once that dries, then we can put in the white and then pupils. But while that's drying, we can go back to some flesh tones, start laying in more highlights on the foreheads. And you can see I'm leaving kind of a crease in the forehead there. That'll help give the face some definition, kind of a stern, serious look. And these highlights just continue to get smaller and smaller on the miniature, and brighter in tone. And we carry that through with the hands. Here's where we start separating kind of the tendons on the back of the hand. So we've got a little bit lighter tone covering the back of the hand, and then starting to pick out the higher details. And into the thumb. This sculpt here is done really well. However, this hand here actually has some challenges just because of the fist that the miniature is making. And then onto the calf and the kind of side and front of the shin. Again, we're going to keep the highlights moving up. You can see the paint that I'm laying down is kind of sporadic. It's broken up. I try not to do clean, even lines so that it blends with the lower levels really well. You don't want those lines on things like flesh. Otherwise, it just looks too cartoony. There isn't enough blending on the flesh tone, so it really stands out. And again, just kind of those tendons on the hands and the fingers. And just like the face, these will get smaller and smaller as we move away from the sleeve into the knuckles, where it's got the most stretch and kind of the brightest highlights of the flesh tone. And those pupils have dried really well. Now we can go through and add in the off-white. Boy, I definitely need that handle. And this is called a misty white. It's got a little bit of blue in the white. And you can see there I did a little bit too thin on this eye. Part of that is the paint dries so fast. I've got a dehumidifier, so the paint can dry a little bit faster. but it dries in the brush as well. And the second white of the eye. Pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. They're on the same plane. Once we get those pupils in, make sure they're looking the same way. That kind of blue-white is going to go really well with the purple tones, so it's not going to be a huge variance. Then just further on to highlighting on the skin tones. This is just brighter and brighter of the same shades. So by adding a lighter flesh tone to my shadow color, just blending it up, making sure I don't have bits stuck in the tip of my brush. You can see being very careful now to just get the highest parts, smaller and smaller areas that are going to get highlights. Now this will give Gonthor, when it's on the table with the others, his skin tone is definitely going to be a darker skin tone. And that's what I'm looking for. I want that real stark variance to the other half-elf of jaw that we painted first in our series of painting an adventuring party. And just continuing highlights, trying to get those knuckles to really pop out, smaller and smaller bits. Point on the brush is super important. You can see I'm using a synthetic brush here rather than my normal natural bristle brush. And that's as a challenge to myself. I'm trying to stretch myself and master using the synthetics a little bit better. So kind of a personal challenge. Laying in some pupils here. This is one where I actually slowed it down a bit because I had a few questions pop up on how do I do it. I know the camera doesn't focus much, but you can see I've used a different brush and just a very fine brush. Lay in those pupils. I want to make sure he's looking the right way. And then we can proceed on to more of the highlighting of flesh tones. And again, just the same tone, we're just making it lighter and lighter with a brighter flesh tone, adding it to our shadow color to bring it up nice and bright, and really standing out where the sunlight would be hitting. Because he's a player character, we know that we like the light source to be directly above our player characters. That's how I always put the lights, unless I'm doing OSL. And then I am doing just a hair on the knuckles. If you flex your knuckles, they get lighter in tone. So we want to just emulate that on the miniature. Very little bits here on the calves. Again, this is going to be a little bit different because there should be more shading there, but we'll get natural shading, so it'll look okay when it's on the table. And then same with this side here. And then the hand, again, just really focusing on the knuckles. We want to have those knuckles really stand out. And the highest points on the fingers and the highest point on the thumb. Again, that's going to be the bend in that thumb. And then the tips of the fingers just to emulate the fingernails. That flesh tone's looking really good. The little bits that we've done on the highlighting, really making that face stand out. And tonally, making it look expressive by how we're laying those highlights on. You see here is just the very tips of the knuckles. Those couple are a challenge there. And then the smallest point on the calves, the very highest points where the calves round up and go into the knee. And then also just the tips of the knuckles, just to make sure that we get good tone on those highest points where the skin is stretched the most. And overall, I think we've started really strong. Good face for Gonthor, our party's Warlock. It'll feature a lot more purples, but overall I think the flesh tones came out really good, really differentiated and expressive. I'm looking forward to painting this one because it's got a lot of bits and bobs, and bringing in that purple in the fabrics is really going to make this guy stand out. And we do have a fun little aspect we're going to put in that backpack. That'll be next time. Hope you enjoyed.